I think you mentioned their posture, and I think that's really important to mention as well. Sorry, when we're looking at
Yeah.
minimum exercise or exercises that I would really recommend women do, I would say that, again, if you're new to exercise, you might prefer to work with a trainer that specializes in pre and postnatal, but deep core exercises are also really beneficial during pregnancy that will help us with our postpartum recovery. I would also recommend exercises that work the glutes. So we have a tilt in the pelvis during pregnancy. As the bump expands, your pelvis is sort of shifted forwards. If you can imagine, like a bowl of water, if you tip the milk out the front of the bowl, your pelvis shifts forwards in that way as the bump, it doesn't pull it forwards, but as the bump expands,
Yeah.
the pelvis shifts. And working the whole core. So without going into too much detail, we have different layers in our abdominals, and there's a really deep muscle called the transverse abdominis, and it wraps around your torso almost like a corset. So underneath that six-pack muscle, we've got our obliques, and then under there we've got this transverse abdominis, or the TVA. And that muscle can really help us to stabilize our entire torso. It helps us to stabilize the pelvis. It works very closely with the pelvic floor. So exercises, I know I've already mentioned the bridge and the bird dog exercise, modified planks, really great movements, pelvic tilt exercises, which you can do lying on the floor, or you can do them standing if you're further on in pregnancy and lying on your back is uncomfortable. Leg slide exercise, things like that really help to work the deep core, really important. And glute exercises like glute kickbacks, or, if you've got a resistance band, doing exercises, something like the clam with or without a resistance band, really great to work the glutes, which will help us to reestablish that the optimum pelvic position after pregnancy, because it helps us to improve our posture. All of that plays a part in our posture. So you might notice that you have lower back pain in pregnancy because you've got this arch in the lower back where the pelvis has been tilted forwards and we're compressing the spine at the back. So glute exercises, again, really great to help us, alleviate some of that pressure and reset that pelvic tilt postpartum. So all of that, again, I would say, and I know it sounds like a lot, they're actually very simple exercises that you can do. I'm sharing them. I share regularly simple exercises on my social media, or it's in the book. So, but those types of exercises really important during and after pregnancy.
And to combat perhaps a myth, perhaps not a myth, are we training during this time as you work with clients? Is it to optimize, if you can optimize, or maybe facilitate labor? Or is it for the postpartum, or a bit of both? But is there some sort of help that you can do for labor through training?
Yeah, both. So, I mean, again, it depends what type of labor you want. But if you want an active labor, I mean, labor's really physical. So having a good cardiovascular system, good heart health, strong muscles, that's going to help you. If you want an active labor where you're maybe gripping onto something and you're hanging down, you might want that. You might want to be on all fours, all of that. So yes, exercise can absolutely help us with labor preparation. A part of labor preparation, what I would say is, as much as we do want to focus on the deep core and working the pelvic floor as well during pregnancy, because again, that shift in the pelvis, if you imagine your pelvis like a bowl, when your pelvis is straight, all your internal organs and everything, they rest equally across the bony structures of the pelvis. So it helps to support all of that weight. When the pelvis is shifted forwards, internal organs, baby, placenta, amniotic fluid, everything is shifted off that bony structure and it rests more heavily onto the pelvic floor. So that's why we often notice sort of increased pressure or pelvic floor dysfunction, urinary incontinence during pregnancy. So all of that, really important to help us rehabilitate the pelvic floor. But in labor preparation, we also want to work on some pelvic floor relaxation exercises, because we want that relaxation and release to help baby descend down the birth canal. So that is also a part of labor preparation, as is having strength, upper body strength. Like I said, if you want an active labor. So yes, exercise can help us prepare for labor, but exercise can also help us to have a more efficient postnatal recovery, postpartum. So both.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think the pelvic floor is something that I'd like to touch on a little bit more, because again, even that kind of description you gave of it there, It makes a lot more sense because we all know that our pelvic floor is important and we should do pelvic floor exercises as we get older, whether we have children or not. It is important to do. But what actually is it?
Okay, so the pelvic floor is a group of muscles. Before human beings were walking up on 2 feet, when we were quadrupeds on 4 feet, um, we the base of the core was the front of the abdominal wall. But then, as human beings stood up, we walked on 2 feet. The pelvic floor was created, and it's a relatively small muscle when you look at the rest of the body. But there are lots of muscles that build up the pelvic floor, and it's like a sling from the front to the back. And it's at the base of our core, and it supports everything. Like I just mentioned, our internal organs. It helps us with bladder function. There's so much that our pelvic floor does. Sexual function. So having a healthy pelvic floor is for everybody. Men have a pelvic floor as well, and men also. Gosh, this tilt in the pelvis doesn't just happen in pregnancy. If you increase weight, for example, men and women can have that tilt in the pelvis. So it's something that we should all be aware of. You might just have bad posture habits, or maybe you sit for so long and your glutes become inactive. So there can be lots and lots and lots of reasons that we have this shift in the pelvis. So the pelvic floor is really important to help us with everything that I just mentioned. As I said, it helps us with incontinence. It helps us with sexual function. It's supporting all our organs. It helps us to generate power on an exhale when we're doing movements. The pelvic floor is also connected. There's like a deep line of body tissue called the deep front line. Or the deep front line. I was just wondering, is it the front deep line? But it's not. It's the deep front line.
Yeah.
Either or. It is the deep front line today. And it connects our pelvic floor all the way to our jaw, all the way down through the pelvic floor, and then down to the base of our foot. So there can be so many. If we have pelvic floor dysfunction, or vice versa, it might be that if you are someone who clenches your jaw, or if you experience that postnatally. After having my twins after the cesarean section, my body went into almost like a bit of a shock with the incision site. And I found I was really clenching my jaw. That can mean that it's going to trigger a response to clench and have this like overly tight pelvic floor. Again, foot health, how we stand impacts the pelvic floor, which is why we might notice incontinence when we're running or jumping. So, there's so much that comes into pelvic floor health. And it can also impact all these other areas of our body.